All right, welcome to those of you who are joining us on the various Geneva Learning Foundation platforms across YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, as well as Twitch. You can find our events, including this one. This is something special. We do this once a month with a group of wonderful people. It's not always the same people. They don't come every month, but when they do come, it's a pleasure to welcome them. And so far, in the room with us, we have Brian Hopkins, Catherine Russ, Emanuele Copabianco, Karen Watkins, of course, my co-convener, and Laura Bierema, Nancy Dixon, as well as a number of contributors who have joined. And I see both names of people who are returning. If you are listening and following this online, I'll be looking at your comments and we'll be sharing them. So please say hello. Let us know what city and country you're connecting from, and let us know what your expectations are. We'll be starting in less than 2 minutes. See you very soon. All right, warm greetings. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever the case may be. I'm Reda Sadki from the Geneva Learning Foundation, and we're embarking on this third episode of our dialogue on learning, leadership, and impact. I'm here, of course, with my co-convener, Karen E. Watkins. Karen, how are you doing this afternoon, I believe it is for you?
I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, and I've enjoyed the previous ones as well.
All right, wonderful.
I understand it's Mother's Day in France today, right?
That's right, yes.
I hope you've had a good one, you and your family.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. So the dialogue connects a very diverse group of learning leaders. Tonight, you're going to hear about education technology, K through 12 schooling, as well as the COVID-19 humanitarian health response in the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. That's a wide span, but it's all in one world, in the same world. And the point is not to talk about the events or to talk about the operational aspects. It's to really reflect in a fast-paced world where we keep going faster and faster, where the focus is on delivering results. The focus is on the successive crises. This space, this learning and leadership dialogue is intended to be a kind of safe haven where an improbable group of people, improbable in the sense that they would probably otherwise never meet were it not for this convening, come together once a month, usually the last Sunday of each month, and have a chat and really share both sort of singular leadership journeys and discuss them and think about them and think about as well current events. I have no idea where the conversation tonight is going to go. Do you, Karen?
It's a mystery.
All right. And amongst the key contributors I'm going to show, so it's audio only. You won't be seeing us. You'll have to listen. You can find out on the Learning Foundation's page who the key contributors are. I'm going to tell you, and you can see, you can scroll through and get a little bit. You can click on the pictures and or just Google them. You'll see that they're all exceptional, exceptionally interesting individuals, completely different paths in some cases, and that's kind of the point, is around that productive diversity. So you can see here, I'm not going to scroll through the whole list, but I am going to tell you who is in the room with us tonight. So want to acknowledge Emanuele Copabianco. This is his first dialogue. Brian Hopkins, Catherine Russ, Esther Wojcicki, Laura Bierema, Nancy Dixon, I believe, and Barbara Moser as well. I just spotted her in the room with us. Wonderful to have you all here. I'm going to give you a quick overview. What we're hoping to explore tonight is really to sort of refocus on the leadership journeys of key contributors. And that's one of the reasons for this dialogue, is really to explore that relationship between learning and leadership. And each person in this room has their own singular leadership journey. Now, this may have a collective dimension, maybe related to various kinds of movements, to belongings, to affiliations that we have. And even when this is so, it's still deeply personal and individual. It's this process of accretion. Although, of course, we're likely to recall quantum leaps in significant learning, and there's a moment of coming to consciousness about the significance of leadership. There may be a discomfort with calling oneself a leader, given the conflation between leadership and authority, leadership and management, leadership and perceived value in society. So I kind of wanted to start there and start with those of you who are first-time key contributors here for this learning and leadership dialogue. And I have a few questions to be, which let me just see here. Oops. Yeah. How does each of you define the notion of leadership in this digital age? How is it different from notions of leadership in the past? When and how did you personally realize the significance of the leadership question in your work, in your life? Who or what helped you come to that consciousness? What difference did it make to have this new consciousness about the significance of leadership? And what's your own leadership practice now? What's changed over time? How do you define your leadership in relation to learning? And are you a learning leader? And if so, what does that mean? And I wanted to just to answer one of the questions. You don't have to answer all of them, and only unmute if you feel that this is really something you want to tackle. I want to just share my own personal contribution, which is, who or what helped me come to consciousness. And it's actually the writing of one of our key contributors, Catherine Russ, whose writings about and research on the significance of leadership for humanitarian work. That was the aha moment for me, reading her work. And I actually went to London to meet her because I was so impressed by what she had done and what she had written, and the sort of incisive way in which she had described how people's ability to lead and change and learn was actually key to the effectiveness of humanitarian work, and also the sort of morality and integrity of humanitarian work. So I'll just open up with that. I also want to highlight that in the room, we're privileged to have a number of key contributors who've really dedicated their life's work to the study and the research of leadership and learning. And we're interested in your leadership journeys as scientists, as researchers, of course, but I'm also going to turn to you, and you know who you are. As you listen to the key contributors share their stories, their singular leadership and learning journeys, what do you hear? What are the insights that you can share from your research that are relevant to the stories we're going to hear tonight from key contributors? How do you actually listen to leadership, and what are you going to be paying attention to in these stories? What do you listen to in order to unravel what goes into and also what can come out of leadership? So I know that's a lot of questions. I would love to hear, because I named you Catherine, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and any of those questions that resonates with you, would love to hear your initial thoughts.
Thanks, Reda. Thanks for making me first as well. So leadership is something that I've always been really interested in, and I think particularly nowadays, because we've got the conflation of so many things, not just the digital and non-digital space, but we've got, so many different leadership models. We have more leadership models at play than at any other time in history. So you can imagine when we're now moving into an era of collaboration, the conflation of like multiple different leadership models and mental models that everyone's coming to the table with necessitates us to be really coming with an inquiring mind and to come with a really open mind about what leadership means for everyone, because it means so many different things. And I think particularly in collaborations now, I've been working with consortia who, each organization has its own kind of learning culture, its own leadership culture, and then they go and partner with somebody from another sector, from another country. So you've got all the cultural dimensions, you've got the sectoral dimensions, you've got the organizational dimensions. And I think, now the trendy words just move from one leadership to another. We had adaptive leadership and transformative leadership, then dispersed leadership. And now we have collaborative leadership, which is because we're having to work so much with others. We're having to really think through about what it means to be with others and work with others. But with all these different models, we also have to think about, well, if everyone's leading, who's following, right? So we're having to take a time in sharing that leadership, right? So who's right for that moment, and being able to ask the question of, what is needed now, and am I needed now, or do I need to step aside and let somebody else take the helm? So I think, we're really in an era now where you don't have a leader for a dedicated post or a dedicated role. You have different people stepping up at different times. And I think that's taking a lot of personal humility to really be self-aware when we don't actually have the skills or the ability to be the best person for this piece of work. And then to recognize talent when we see it and be able to help nurture it and grow it. So I think it's a much different era of, when we were working in hierarchies and the person at the helm was the one doing all the leadership. Now in collaborations and networks, the person who may be the most powerful in the organization right now may be the person who has the most networks, may be the one that has most influencing capacity. The CEO or the top of the tree is not necessarily the leader anymore. So I think it's, it's a complicated era, but it's also a really exciting era because it's helping us now to start sharing the roles around and start to bring leadership qualities in everyone and to help people to be empowered. As a woman, that's been a big thing for me about taking the power and actually stepping up and speaking up against things that I don't agree. And it's taken me a lot of years. Although, Reda, you might disagree with me not being assertive, I have had, quite a lot of moments at work where I didn't feel strong enough to counteract what was going on or to stand up to what lots of people were saying or doing. And it's taken me quite a lot of years to build up that personal power, to take courage and to have courage to speak up.
Thanks, Catherine. There's a lot to unpack in what you said, and this happened with the sort of opening, yes, with the first people who spoke in the last month's dialogue. That's how do you listen to leadership? What are you listening for in order to unravel what goes into and can come out of leadership? I'd like to turn to another first-time key contributor. That's Laura Bierema. You may need to correct how I pronounce your name. So, Laura. Your online, presence, persona says you're a former HR executive in the auto industry who transferred to higher education to work in programs dedicated to promoting learning and development in the workplace. I know there's a lot more than that summary, but in listening to what Catherine just said, and I struggled with sort of the some of the abstractions that she shared, and I wondered, what's the life experience behind that to get, to formulate statements like that about the meaning of leadership. What do you listen to as a scientist who researchers, said the significance of leadership in the workplace?
Well, thank you. And it's a great pleasure to join this dialogue and this wonderful lineup. And I really enjoyed listening to Catherine's reflections. And yes, I started my career in automotive manufacturing. And, I think I got to see leadership in multiple forms up close and personal. I was in a 1,000 employee UAW plant as a labor relations rep to start. And I guess as you were asking me that question, one of the things I've been listening to is the Dare to Lead podcast by Renee Brown. And of course, I'm also teaching a graduate leadership course in the fall. So I've been trying to find alternative voices that critique leadership in the ways that we think about it, because I agree that there's lots of flavors. It isn't always done well. And so I've been thinking a lot about, well, what is my leadership diet? What am I reading? What am I consuming? What am I going to be teaching in the fall? And I think that one of the things that for my own practice, and I lead in a lot of different ways. I'm the president of an international association. I have leadership in my program as well as leadership and governance in my university. And the pandemic and racial reckoning in the United States has really changed the game. And I think that the spaces of leadership with social media so prevalent and the platform of leadership being global and sometimes viral makes it glaringly clear which leaders you want to follow and those who you don't. And so I think that to really be a good leader, you have to learn about leadership, but I think you also have to be critical about who you learn it from. And one of the things that strikes me is just because people are good leaders doesn't necessarily mean they're good teachers of leadership. And so, I hope that we think about where's a good place to learn and who should we be learning from as we think about leadership. And so those are some things I'm thinking about. I hope that answers your question. If not, I'm happy to say more.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. Let's. I want to ask that same question, Karen. As you have spent a lifetime researching the significance of leadership in relation to learning. When you hear Catherine's, but now also Laura's, yes, what they shared, what are you listening for in order to unravel? What are the leadership aspects? What can we learn from these leadership narratives? How can we do the sense making when people share what is their experience, how they have grown and come to consciousness about the significance of leadership, and then continue to grow, hopefully, as leaders?
Well, I like to, separate what we believe about leadership from what we do. When I was associate dean, the thing that was so amazing to me, really, was the difference between what I believed I stood for as a leader and what it was like to try to practice leadership. Because you move into a moving stream. There's a number of things that are happening as you go into the job that you didn't start, but you have to finish. There are, problems and issues you inherit but there's also everybody's expectations of what a leader is. So everybody kind of has these different individual perceptions of what leadership means, and therefore what you should do as the leader. And so navigating those perceptions and moving through it, I ended up really relying personally on my I'm an active experimenter. I like to get out and do things. I like to do it collegially and collaboratively. And so I ended up I still think that that in this era, that working collaboratively and taking action, learning through experimenting, learning through doing, is still a pretty powerful way to learn. And as you know, Reda, in the work that we've done, Victoria Marsick and I, looking at a learning culture, leadership comes out over and over again as the most predictive of overall performance improvement. So, and in fact, within that, the single item that is most predictive in our measure is leaders mentor and coach those they lead. So I also believe very strongly that leaders need to be, there need to be learning leaders. I love that you use that language because we use it as well. And that they have to, when we did interviews in a multi-billion-dollar biomedical company, the capacity of the leader to describe accurately what is the next specific thing that my subordinate needs to learn in order for them to move up in the organization. Their ability to do that, first of all, it was phenomenal. But I think that's the kind of capacity we're looking for, is people that can lead the learning in their unit, and they understand, that learning is not, it's a process, and it is developmental. And so those are some of the things that come to mind as I listen to these ideas.
So I want to acknowledge online, we've got folks who have been joining the dialogue. So Jamila Husseini, a warm welcome to you. Robert Ninsen, joining from South Sudan. Steve Mwangi from Kenya. Let's see, Kabir Isa Ado, who's Associate Director, Leadership and Health Communications, is in his title. He's connecting via LinkedIn. Elena Cotelo, connecting from Montevideo in Uruguay. Noura Ibrahim Dora sends a greeting from Nigeria, as well as Modupe Orols. And please, let us know. I'm, keeping an eye on the comments, and we will be pulling them into the conversation so that every person can be a contributor to this dialogue. Magaji Ubale Ado, Ashraf Ali Lako, who says, so far it's informative, he says. Thank you, Ashraf, and don't hesitate to share your comments via Facebook. Ellen Scully Russ, okay. All right, Ellen Scully says, okay, well, if you've just sent us this, you found us on LinkedIn. She tried joining via Facebook, YouTube. All I can see is your landing page. If you're sending this comment, you should just be able to click on the play button and join the live stream. And then Atahir Abubakar, who says, very interesting. Now, I recognize many of our participants from the Geneva Learning Foundation's immunization program, and really want to honor and thank you for joining this leadership dialogue. It's our immunization work is primarily focused on the, let's say, the technical dimension, but there's a lot of leadership aspects as well. So I'm really pleased to see so many of you joining, as well as people from other areas who've never participated in the foundation's activities. All right, now the elephant in the room, or one of them, is the COVID-19 pandemic, and we can't ignore that. And tonight, amongst the key contributors, we're going to have two very different lenses, paths to discuss the pandemic and how the ongoing, the sort of sweeping changes, the accelerating changes, some of them were there before, but what they mean for leadership, for learning, for those of us who are working in one way or another to achieve impact. However, before I go any further, I want to acknowledge the presence of Victoria Marsick. So Victoria has been Karen Watkins, my co-convener, her writing partner, and Victoria, would love to have a word from you before we go any further, just to and what this feels like so far. Yes, so you are a professor at the Columbia Teachers College. Together with Karen, you wrote Informal and Incidental Learning, and an increasingly relevant book originally published in 1993. Can you tell us why did you join tonight or this afternoon for you? What are your expectations from a dialogue like this?
Well, hi, Reda. Hi, everybody. I love to see people I know like Nancy Dixon looking at on the Zoom and hearing Laura and hearing other people. It's just great and especially to meet people from so many different parts of the world. I have been involved in some of these dialogues, I was on YouTube, I think, at the time, and I just was mostly listening, but I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing to bring so many voices in the room. And in some ways, I think that is leadership, right? I mean, leadership often shows up in little things, and it's amazing if you watch leaders who they include and who they don't include. Their words are inviting, but they don't always. They engage selectively with different people, and so who feels, who are those people, and who feels empowered? I think, Catherine, I love the notion of struggling with being as a woman. Empowerment has been something that has always been a fascination to me as well. And I have many Asian women in my master's program, and they don't really feel empowered as leaders when they come into the program. So, they are trying to take up their power, if you would, or to become leaders. And they know they're going to go back to cultures where that is not really recognized so often or well. So, I think the questions on leadership are very intricately interconnected and interwoven with intersectionality, with power dynamics. There's still a lot of organizations that, no matter what we say, including higher ed, we're still very hierarchical. And, so that it's interesting to see. I think that's flipping as younger people with different experiences are able to take over in locations. And maybe it's not just youth, whatever it is, but there's still a lot of people around who loves that hierarchical stuff, so I think it's a complex thing we're looking at, and trying to understand what it really means in what context. And but I really applaud your moving forward. And as Karen, of course, has talked about, and other people, for me, I've seen it mostly in the domain of leadership learning, leadership for learning. And not that the leadership starts out to be for learning, but that the leadership is aware of the fact that everybody's watching them and doing what it is that they're doing, not what they're saying, so that they, people do learn. We learn from, you have a change in presidents. Right now in the United States, we have Joe Biden as president, and I can't count the numbers of people who always start their presentations by, now look, because Joe Biden always used to say that kind of thing. They didn't say it before, so we listen and we watch and we do. So we're social animals. So I think it's a wonderful area to work in, and I'm glad you're opening it up and talking about it in this way. And thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So we have some comments in our Zoom studio. So Ilham Abumspe, who says leadership is a very serious thing that all organizations should adopt, but unfortunately, I cannot see leadership in many organizations. And let's see, Tina Irogama says, why do some leaders use their leadership position to oppress their people or subordinates? How can this challenge be addressed? I am looking forward to hearing some of the thoughts from key contributors about this. I do want to go first to Nancy Dixon. Nancy, thank you for accepting the invitation to join as a key contributor. What are your thoughts so far. And again, that question, how do you listen to leadership when, these narratives, some of these narratives about how you realize the significance of leadership, who or what helps you come to consciousness, what difference does it make to be conscious of the importance of leadership? What do you listen for in order to sort of unravel what goes into, or what can come out of leadership?
Thank you. I'm pleased to speak a little bit about that. And Victoria was just speaking about hierarchy, and that so many of us are still stuck with it. And it occurs to me that one of the problems is that many leaders, that's the only role they know, is the typical hierarchical leader. So I think one of the learning things we can help leaders do is to find a different role than the role of the person that's listened to. And you said a few times, how do you listen to leaders? I think probably, we all kind of think we should be listening to leaders, where I would say the leaders ought to be asking questions. So I'm very influenced by the work of Ron Heifetz on leaders who are adaptive leaders. And he talks about a very different role for leaders. And that's the role of one is really looking around the organization and saying, what are the really difficult problems, the adaptive problems that we've not been able to solve? And really being the person that looks for those issues and thinks that through carefully, and then frames the issue for the people that he brings or her, that she brings together, in a way that does not have does not presuppose the answer. Just a framing that's very open so that all viewpoints can come. And then the role of convening and holding the space for the dialogue, and the role of creating structures in the organization where such dialogues can go on, where learning can go on jointly in groups. Those are all new roles, I think, for leaders. And we've not done a whole lot of helping them manage those roles or think about those roles. But I think that's one of the issues where I started, is that, I think many leaders are saying to themselves, if I'm not the person who's making the decisions and telling others what to do, what is my role then? So I very much like this idea of being the leader's role being to convene groups to deal with those adaptive issues that the organization is facing.
Thank you, Nancy, very much indeed. So we're going to come to new key contributors, Esther Wojcicki, and Emanuele Copabianco. Before we do, though, we have with us Barbara Moser-Mercer and Brian Hopkins, who were with us for the first time last month for the dialogue, and I'd like to ask Barbara and Brian for some any reflections on the conversation so far, and a month later after the previous dialogue, which was very exploratory and in some ways very abstract, and at times very concrete. What are your thoughts going into this dialogue? How can we? Let's start with Brian. What are your thoughts about how we can deal with something as broad and expansive a topic or topics as learning and leadership, and focus on the significance in sort of meaningful, tangible ways?
Well, I was struck by something that Karen just said about the difference between how you think you might approach leadership and how you actually do it. I think that has a lot of lessons for learning and leadership. I think it's really important that if you're going to try to develop a learning culture which is really about learning, then you actually have to really walk that particular talk. I mean, I come across so many, supposed leaders in organizations who just feel the priority is to get the job done, the priority is actually just to sort of, to get to meet the objectives they're working towards and don't take any time out to actually reflect on practice or to reflect in practice. And I think those are really key. I think one of the things for me about a leader, a real leader, a really effective leader, is somebody who actually takes time out with whoever they're leading in order to talk about what is going on, what have the challenges been, and how can we improve, how can we do things better. So I think that's kind of a key thing which is coming out for me at the moment.
Thanks, Brian. Barbara? If you are able to unmute.
Yes. Yeah, I'm able to. I just want to turn my video on as well when I speak. And thank you, Reda, for continuing to organize and play a leading role in bringing people of very diverse backgrounds together, people who have also extremely diverse experiences and have come to think about leadership from where they come from and, where they're headed. I think the first time I was really thinking about leadership, and this may sound rather odd, when I was in discussion with a donor and I was entirely convinced that the grant that the donor was going to offer to me was for a particular implementation. And in the whole conversation, the donor actually led up to then awarding me a grant for something entirely different. And we then came to discuss it. And his answer was very simple. He said, "You're a thought leader." And I just wanted to throw in this notion of a thought leader because it really cuts through the hierarchies and it cuts through established organizational structures. And I find those to be the most difficult to deal with when we try and lead in learning. Especially in the humanitarian sector, as I deal in higher education emergencies, the structures are so set, and the ways of doing are so set that even when you come in as a thought leader, the rules of the game and the standard operating procedures are there to really create extraordinary barriers. And I think a forum like this that you're creating here makes it possible for people to engage without having to think of these barriers. And hopefully, more people will then begin to speak up, as was said before, especially for women often, and in higher education. I've spent all my life in higher ed. It's an extremely structured place. It's very hierarchical, and you can't do certain things if you don't have the right title and you don't have the right kind of seniority. So yeah, for me, the thought leadership is really something I'd like to stress and emphasize, and just our courage to, and I think this is what's about to change, our courage to begin to speak up about things and to speak out, despite the fact that often we find ourselves, as women, the only woman in the room, so to speak, and then standing up for your principles and standing up for your values. I think that too is part of that thought leadership that doesn't need a title necessarily or a position in the hierarchy to go ahead. It just needs the courage and the conviction that what you're doing and what you're saying is actually needs to be said. And even if that costs you your job or whatever it is, not all of us are obviously in the privileged position to be able to to lose their job because of what they say. But I think if more can take can be that courageous, I think the world would soon look differently. So that is my reflection, both on the last time and hearing some of the very valuable contributions already today.
Thank you, Barbara. Before we come to Esther Wojcicki and Emanuele Copabianco, I want to highlight some of the comments. One is from Sohini Sanyal. I could read it, but because Sohini is with us, and let me see if, and she is, I know in India, it is very late. Sohini, I hope you're still with us. And can you tell us what did you write and why?
Hi, Reda. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm wide awake listening to the conversation going on. And the reason I wrote this is, because I have been seeing this happening, in terms of learning and leadership, we are often able to go into a room and say, "Look, I've been doing this for so many years, and I know a little bit about it, and I'm willing to, share my experiences and see if we can resolve some of the challenges together." But right now, we are in a situation where everyone is new when it comes to the COVID-19 virus or the vaccine. And a lot of times, when we communicate or we want to pass along a message, there are many other information that people are getting. So it's a challenge for the leadership, that why would people listen to what I have to say rather than listen to so many other sources of information. So that's what I was thinking about when I actually wrote that challenge, that right now we have to be constant learners, constant beginners, so to speak, and yet be able to lead in our domain of work, which is quite challenging.
Thanks, Sohini. And for the key contributors to understand again where you're coming from, can you tell us, like, in what context did you come to this, realization of this big challenge, and to what extent are you thinking of yourself as a leader and of leadership, in your work, in the work that you're doing?
To give you a simple example, we have a lot of information coming about gaps in the doses between vaccines, right? So what's going to happen is, if even if there is credible data, there is research, and someone comes and says, look, we can actually increase the gap between 2 doses. But because it's all emerging data right now, there is so much of skepticism. There are a lot of people who might say, oh, well, but you told us something different a few months back, and now you're telling us something different. So in perspective of our work, I think, and this relates to what you were saying about who are we listening to. Are we listening to experts? Are we listening to people who have the right information? And at the same time, are we listening to the people we lead as well? Because they have their own apprehensions, they have their own hesitations. And if we are not cued in to what they are thinking, or the uncertainties that they are going through, it will be very difficult for us to communicate the right message and lead this group of people.
Thank you, Sohini. There's some more additional comments I showed on the screen a little while ago. Atahir Abubakar, who was asking, how can we ensure our leaders listen to their people in order to progress? And then we also want to acknowledge a few people who've joined us, such as Mohammed Noor Alio, who's streaming in live from Kenya, Mandera County. Warm welcome to you, Mohammed. And then Steve Mwangi, streaming from Addis Ababa. And yes, thank you for those contributions. Looking at your comments, we'll be pulling in questions and may turn to the key contributors to see what they think or how they would respond to these questions. Now, Esther Wojcicki is, I tried and struggled to concisely summarize on the dialogues page, the description or the sort of mini bio. And so here's what I put: educator and journalist, author of both Moonshots in Education and How to Raise Successful People. And what I really loved was, I don't remember even where this came from, but Esther believes that simple lessons can lead to radical results. Esther, a warm welcome to you, and would love for you to expand on that before I ask you a whole bunch of questions about the role of learning and leadership in your life.
Well, Reda, thank you so much for including me, and I'm very happy to be here in this distinguished group of people from all over the world. It makes me very excited. So I have been a leader my whole life. And I can say that it's not always a very pleasant position to be in. And it's because I've come to this conclusion that even if you're making change for the better, people don't like change. They'll never tell you that. They'll never say that they don't want to make, quote, progress. But in fact, it's very hard for people to change. And so one of the things that I've done, and I know there's a lot of leaders on this call, one of the things I've done in order to make the changes that I have is just to be persistent. And I think that that is one of the attributes of a leader, is not to take your eye off the goal, not to be distracted by all the distractions out there, because there's a lot of them, but to keep your eye on the goal and to constantly reassure people that the direction that you're leading is the direction they should try. I've also decided that in order for people to make the changes that you want them to make, they have to have sort of like a toe in the water approach. They try it just a little, and then they see how they like it. And then if it's not so bad, then they can try more. So that's what I've been trying to do in education now. Really, I've been teaching at Palo Alto High School, Palo Alto, California, for 40 years. And in the time that I started, that was 1984. Actually, I started in 1980, but I was not full-time till 84. Education has changed dramatically. But when I first started, education was honestly the same way it had been for the last 200 years. And the changes that I tried to make in the first 10 years I was teaching, I was seen as some radical maverick out there, like doing crazy things. And that was really difficult for me. But I stuck with it. Let's put it that way. I didn't fight it. And I just continued to persist. And then I kind of transitioned from the radical, crazy maverick to the leader. And so that's what I'm just trying to say to all of you who are leaders from wherever you are in the world, that, if what you're saying and leading makes sense, and you keep encouraging people to move in that direction, eventually they will. And then, you'll be, then it'll become not just a trickle, but a big rushing river of people that want to do the same thing. So I don't know if that's what you wanted me to talk about, Reda, but that's been my experience as a leader. And today I'm very happy to say that a lot of people seem to think that what I say is good. And so I have a lot of data points to prove that it works. And I didn't invent what I'm talking about, which is to give students more control in the classroom. If you look at John Dewey 100 years ago, he said the same thing. Somehow people seem to have forgotten. But anyway, so thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak out.
Thank you, Esther. We're going to dive into it. I imagine I could hear the smiles as you said John Dewey around the room. Yes, so the American learning theorist that explored the significance of experiential learning that I'm betting is also a common thread amongst many of us. We'll come back to that. I want to again go to the. So this conversation is definitely stirring up thought and thinking. And Steve Mwangi from Addis Ababa, here's what he writes. Let me see if I can pull up so you can all see the... So Steve says, leaders lead by example and must therefore lead the way to new knowledge, innovations, and creativity as they lead in devising solutions for the challenges of 21st century. Hajara Musa Suleiman says, the thing with our leaders is, if the ideas are not from them, they think it will not be useful. We do not know anything. Steve Mwangi also says, leaders of the 21st... No, that's the same. Okay, that's the same comment. Thanks. On both Facebook and YouTube, Steve, you must be following us on both platforms. And now here, several of you have mentioned the specificities around the experience of gender in leadership. Magaji Ubale Ado Minjibir says, women should have power and leadership role in taking care of their family well-being, child health care, including immunization against preventable diseases. Subject to discussion. Thank you for all those contributions. I want to now go to Emanuele Copabianco. Emanuele, you are the head of health at the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies, the IFRC. Now, I want to state as it says clearly on our webpage, whatever your organizational affiliations, you are only asked to represent yourself and to share your personal opinions. So it'll be your responsibility to distinguish or differentiate where that is necessary. So, of course, as the head of health of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Secretariat in Geneva, the IFRC, you've been on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've heard this phrase, and we've heard sort of polemical discussions around it as well. Are we all in the same boat? And leave aside the polemics, but if we are all in the same boat, can you tell us, how would you describe your role in the boat in the past year and a half or so?
Well, thank you very much, and greetings to you all from Geneva. A great pleasure to be with you. I've been stimulating already. I've a page full of notes of the discussion that have come up so far, and I'll give my contribution. My role in the Red Cross is to try to lead on the technical side the work of 192 national societies, Red Cross, Red Crescent societies in 192 countries. That have been very much involved, each one in a very different way in the response to COVID-19. And I must say, what I've clearly learned throughout this year and a half is that the concept of leadership is really moving towards, at least in this response, certainly for us, to a true collaborative model, very diffuse, very much based on the digital technologies to communicate and share very fast, and linking different capacities all over the world in a way that would have been unthinkable in the past. The typical humanitarian response of a few decades ago, but also a few years ago, would see people flying into countries where there would be a humanitarian disasters. This time, because of COVID, there was no flying in. The entire response was localized. The entire response was really based on the capacity that was on the ground and the ability to adapt to the changes that COVID was bringing. And we have seen enormous resilience within the community, and it's all enormous learning. And what my role in the Federation here in Geneva has been is trying to make the connections across the different continents, so that people from Somaliland could learn from people on Thailand, and then relate to people from Canada. And this has been working extremely well, and making the sharing extremely important. And to come back to one point that was mentioned by Sohini, I think there has been a continuous learning at all levels within this pandemic. And one of the traits that I found in leaders that were very effective was the ability not only to recognize that they didn't know it all, but also the ability to go and try to find answers and learn, but also the ability to recognize mistakes. A lot of mistakes were made, a lot of information were not right, and errors were made. And I think those leaders that were true to themselves and recognize and communicate with the human fragility that we all bring in, were recognized for who they are, more people than leader in abstract. So this emotional element of leadership for me is something that has been very evident in those leaders that were able to communicate and connect with the people, either in televisions or on the ground. And this is very different from those leaders that were more old style, hierarchical, coming down, dictating, and not really able to engage. And if I can just say this one last point. The emotional leaders, the leaders that have been able to connect, are been, at least in the field that I've been working, mostly the women. That is the type of leaders that I've seen emerging from many countries. While the masculine type of leadership, which is probably the image that many had from the past, has, in my opinion, shown a lot of limits. And I'll stop here.
Thanks, Emanuele. So you are, as I said, the head of health at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the IFRC. Now, if I look on the IFRC webpage, it says this is the world's largest humanitarian network. I understand it's a movement that is led by volunteers who live in the communities that they serve. Can you explain, so we can understand your perspective, how this is different from the other components of the humanitarian system, so the United Nations and international NGOs like Save the Children or Care International or Doctors Without Borders and so many others? What is unique about the perspective and the vantage point that you have?
Yeah, there are a couple of differences from many other humanitarian organizations. The Red Cross, Red Crescent is present all over the world in 102 countries. So in 192 countries. So it's in Uruguay, in India, in the US, in Sierra Leone, everywhere. And it's a movement that is based on volunteers. And there are 14 million volunteers all over the world that are basically united by the same desire to help others in the name of the principle of humanity, and they come together particularly to help people in distress, whatever situation that may be. That is a very strong point, because these people, these volunteers, come from the communities that they try to serve, and that allows the volunteers to be able to understand the needs better than anybody else that comes from the outside and respond to those needs. And again, the listening part is the other element that I've noted in my notes here, that leaders needs to have. The ability to listen and to respond, to adapt, and what we do on the ground is really trying to bring local solutions that then are connected with the global knowledge that we in Geneva try to bring together. So this idea of a spider web that goes in 192 countries, has 14 million people on the ground to provide support, has been tremendously instrumental, from screening people for COVID-19 to support the people that were in isolation, bringing them food, bringing them medicine, just providing the emotional support through psychosocial interventions, to setting up quarantine centers, or now trying to bring the vaccines in many countries around the world, where the Red Cross has this specific goal to identify the most vulnerable and help governments to serve the most vulnerable in the very first place. So it's a huge organization and quite effective one, because it really works at the community level.
Thanks, Emanuele. Now, you've spoken about your organization's work, but I heard very little about you as an individual, and I know you obviously your responsibilities and are international. You've worked at that international level for a long time. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're also an Italian national. So I can't help but ask you, what did you feel as one of the global leaders, effectively, responsible, accountable for the world's response to COVID-19? Was there a personal dimension to this? How did that shape or affect your leadership? And then after that question, I'm going to turn back to the key contributors. Really that question. And as you've listened to Esther, I thought that was such a compelling, powerful presentation that she did of what leadership, how she presented the notion of leadership. And then Emanuele, what are you listening for? in order to unravel what goes into and can come out of leadership. But Emanuele, first that question on that very personal level, how did that shape your leadership, if it did at all, about what was involved here, what was going on for you, say about a year and 4 or 5 months ago?
I'll be very personal. So I was in Congo, in Goma, on the 31st of December 2019, and we were responding to the Ebola outbreak in North Kivu, in Goma, where the volcano just erupted a few weeks ago. And there I got a tweet that basically talked about the Wuhan market, and I remember at that moment saying, "Ooh, that is interesting." And I started following it for the first 10 days. And then on the 14th of January, I remember writing to my Secretary General saying, this is extremely serious. We need to alert the entire system. And we're already operating in China, responding in China, but we need to have a global alert. And this is going to be either, a test in the best case scenario, or, will be something that we have operated and have responded very, very early on in the way. And we started working with Asia Pacific at that time. And at that time, WHO was giving the recommendation that masks were not to be used. And I remember having to go to speaking to the Secretary Generals of all the Red Cross in Asia Pacific. And then I had to say, I was ready to say, WHO recommends that masks are not to be used. And at that moment, the regional director told me, don't say it, because people are using the masks there, and that will not be well received. Just avoid that point and go ahead. And I remember having, being very conflicted, and then not saying it, and then we moved ahead. Now I bring you forward to the 7th of February, 2020. I was in the office of Mike Ryan, which is the deputy, is number 1 under Dr. Tedros, leading on the response from WHO to the pandemic. And it was very clear at that moment in a discussion we were having, was a Friday afternoon, that this epidemic was going to go really all over the world. And I remember going back to home and talking to my father and talking to my father-in-law, who then put me in touch with a journalist. And I remember at that moment having to say, in Italy, I think we should be getting ready for what may be coming. And it was the 10th of February 2020. And it was a very difficult thing, because I didn't know whether to go for it or not. It went on the first pages of Italian newspaper, and then all of a sudden, everything started in terms of interviews, journals, blah, 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 blah. It was very difficult to manage. And there was not a single case in Italy. And I had 10 days that were probably the most difficult of my professional life, because we were really accused, even as a Red Cross, of creating panic. And defending this was very, very difficult. We're saying, prepare, and we weren't prepared. And it was on the 22nd of February that in Italy, everything exploded. And exploded in my region, Lombardy, where I come from, where my dad lived alone. And it was very, very painful to see then what happened. But that moment, to try to bring the change that was needed in a very uncertain times was a moment for me of leadership. Though differently from Esther, who says she's been a leader all her life, I never considered myself a leader. I still today, I don't consider myself a leader. I don't. Leaders are others, and I'm still very much learning. I may have some leadership moment from time to time, but there is a very element of, if you want, insecurity. I don't know if it's cultural, maybe it's more from the Greek and the Romans that comes there, that and where learning is really, I don't know, it's something that is different that I thought came up with discussion. But that was my defining moment, I think, between January and February last year, and then the setup of the global response of the Red Cross, which has been adopted throughout the world with clear pillars in health and the socioeconomic area. That has been a very interesting part of my job, and then of course following up through the past year and a half.
Thanks very much, Emanuele Capobianco. You're the head of health at the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies, the IFRC. For those of you just joining us, we're going to come back to both you and Esther Wojcicki, an educator and journalist, author of both Moonshots in Education and How to Raise Successful People. Esther believes that simple lessons can lead to radical results. Now, as I said in the opening, we're privileged to have a number of key contributors in the room right now who've dedicated their life's work to the study of leadership and learning. And I want to now turn to key contributors. What did you hear as you listened to Esther Wojcicki's and Emanuele Capobianco's what they shared of their experience, of their insights, of their views on leadership? And I actually realized my question was ambiguous. What I meant was, how do you listen to people sharing their experience of leadership? Like, what's the methodology or the method to, what are you listening for in order to unravel what went into and what came out of the kinds of leadership and the leadership insights and the leadership journeys that Emanuele and Esther and others have shared. So here I'm going to open it up. I'm not sure who to start with. I'm interested in hearing all of you, but we do have the constraint of time. So I'm just going to ask the key contributors to open your microphone. I know there is a raise hand feature, but I don't want to ask for that. Victoria? I see your microphone is on. I don't know if that's...
It was on the whole time.
Okay.
Probably a problem, I suppose. But I think, the way you have been posing this in terms of who we are as a person and what leadership means to us, I think it is a defining feature of how we work on leadership. Our own life experiences and how they've contributed to understanding ourselves as leaders. And that's why I think you hear, I love that you, Emanuele, that you talked about the fact that, maybe it's part of the culture and part of the way I think you probably, the family situation, you were in a social situation as you grew up. I mean, I don't think I was in a family that thought about leadership. I mean, my father was a union. He was very active in the unions, and I got very interested in what he was doing and often helped him with what he was doing. And, I never really thought of myself as a leader. So I think particularly for those who are not in this country, in my country, white males of a certain status, people don't necessarily grow up thinking of themselves as leaders, right? And then the moments come to you where you are supposed to take leadership. And I don't know if people are always prepared to step up and do that. I think they have the capability, but I don't think they know whether that they can do that, and I think when you're a leader, whether you have confidence in yourself or not, that you have to be strong because everybody's going to throw everything at you. No matter what you do, it's going to be wrong. And, that's just part of what happens in leadership roles. You have to really believe in what you're doing because other people are going to, whatever the gripes are, going to come at you, et cetera. So I think, I do listen for how people walk the talk. As Karen said, that item in the DLOQ about how do people mentor and coach and lead other people? Who are they as role models? So I watch what people do, and even if they don't do what they want to do, I think it was it Catherine who talked about that the question of one of the important things is to admit mistakes. I can't recall exactly who said that today, but I think that there are people who I'm always apologizing to people who are doing things that didn't quite work out right, and I don't think in an abject way. I think there's a way of acknowledging that we're trying things and they don't always work, and sometimes we get it wrong, and that doesn't mean we can sit there and not do anything. And so those are some of the things that were going through my mind, Reda, as I was listening to people.
Thanks, Victoria. Would love to hear from other contributors. I see Esther. Yes, I was impressed by the assertive confidence of, yes, I am and always have been a leader, and contrast that with Emanuele. I've never been comfortable. It's always been others who are leaders. And then many of the comments from the countries of for people from countries where the Geneva Learning Foundation has programs around that conflation of leadership with authority. Esther, would love to hear your thoughts and your response.
So let me just tell you the reason. I wasn't always a leader. I became a leader at the age of 10. And okay, that sounds like, a very young age. But what happened at the age of 10 is I had a tragedy in my life. And my youngest brother, who was about 8 years younger than I, died because somebody in a position of leadership, somebody in a role model, gave my mother, who was an immigrant to the United States, the wrong information just because he didn't listen. And what that said to me as a child is that you cannot listen to people and then not question what they're saying. And you definitely need to always think critically. And that sort of set me on a path. I didn't realize it as a child, because you don't realize what you're doing when you're a child. You just move forward. But that set me on a path to always questioning anything that I heard, and always questioning. I don't care what your title is and how many degrees you have after your name. If what you said makes no sense, then it just doesn't matter. And so I became very practical. I mean, I only wanted to lead, but in ways where I could make sure that people could see the results. And that's what I did in my teaching. I've got thousands of students that have gone through this program. And that's what I did with my own daughters, who have very significant leadership roles in the world. And I'm trying to help all teachers be effective in the same way. The formula is in that book of mine. It's actually in both books. And it talks about this acronym that I have there in both of the books. It's called TRICK, and I developed it to help people remember what it is. And it stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And what I did as a teacher is trusted and respected my students and their ideas, gave them a lot of independence, collaborated instead of dictated. Somebody earlier talked about collaborative leadership. Yep, I believe in collaborative leadership, especially in the classroom, and always treated them with kindness. And I can tell you that there is nothing more powerful than kindness. People may forget what you said or what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so that's one of the things and the principles that I've always used, and it's worked really well. So that's what I'm talking about, and why I say that I've been a leader all my life, because it started when I was very young. And I just had my eye on my goal. And there was a lot of divergent sort of talk on the side and all kinds of ways for me to get distracted. But I stuck to it. And here I am all these years later, still sticking to it. So that's what I'd like to suggest, because everybody here is pretty amazing in their leadership roles. And I am sure that there's a lot of, somebody said that already, that there's a lot of people that, don't agree or create problems or whatever. You can't let the noise distract you. So thank you again, Reda, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Esther. And again, the books you're referring to, one is called Moonshots in Education. The other is How to Raise Successful People. We encourage key contributors to share their ongoing projects. And Esther, we'll be talking with you about your new startup, Tract, your latest endeavor in a few minutes. But I'm eager to hear from Nancy Dixon. And then I see Catherine Russ also to, again, around this question, but not limited to it. As you've listened to each other, as you've listened to Emanuele and Esther, what are you listening for in order to unravel what goes into and then what can come out of leadership, Nancy?
What I hear in several people, certainly in Esther, is being a thought leader. She had a fantastic idea that was new for its time about how children learn. And and so what she talked about was inspiring. And we could name a lot of people who we think have been inspiring to us as thought leaders. That seems to me patently different than leaders who impose their view on others. So that's a big difference for me. I've always been struck by what David Bohm said, that we have to have enough faith in our worldview to work from it, but not that much faith that we think it's the final answer. And that's what I hear in both of these people that have talked, that they still question. They don't say it's the final answer. They are, but to have faith in your view, yes, I think that's right.
Thank you, Nancy. Before we go to Kath, I saw a comment from Tina Irogama. I'm hoping she's going to be able to unmute. Tina, are you able to speak? I'm asking you to unmute. Otherwise, we'll come back to you in a minute. Tina said, great story of self, very useful and inspirational. And I would have loved to hear what, I get the inspirational part, but how is the story that she heard useful to her? Tina, you may not be able to unmute. So let's go back to Catherine.
Thank you, Reda. I was particularly struck by Emanuele's comments around not being able to fly in with the leadership and then seeing local leadership rising up. And I think I just wanted to share that I also saw this with the 14 consortia that I've been working with, excuse me. And so these 14 consortia are working in partnerships across sectors all over the globe. And the pandemic brought everyone to a halt. So all the flying, all the moving around the world that would normally happen couldn't happen. So nobody could fly to provide this, so-called leadership. And what happened is that all the local leaders started to step up because they were given some space. And a lot of the leaders have now come out and said, we never needed to go in the first place. We assumed that our leadership was needed. And in a time when it was impossible for us to bring that leadership, we saw this new leadership rising and this new leadership coming and stepping up. And I think this pandemic is really allowing space for people to be able to shine and to be able to be allowed out of their shackles so that true solutions can be found, and that's why I'm so committed to collaborative leadership, because 7 years ago, I did a training course at the Partnership Brokers Association, which kind of opened my whole mind around the fact that we live excluding people. Our models, our hierarchies are just designed to exclude and to put one person above another. And the collaborative model is about including everyone. And I just gave a second thought about how many people leave organizations because of other people excluding them or squashing their leadership potential or not allowing them to flower. And so for me, is the answer is the future is around collaboration. It is around allowing people to step up at different times. And because whatever leadership model we may have, tomorrow may not be the right model, because we don't know, times are changing so fast right now. We really don't know what's needed tomorrow. And the more intelligence and innovation we can bring around the table with the diverse, stakeholders and people that we're working with, will give much more of a chance of finding solutions if we're using everyone's wisdom and everyone's voice than if we're relying on charismatic leaders or the leader at the helm.
I would like to congratulate Catherine Russ for a great talk right now. Thank you for what you just said.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Kath. I'd like to try to go to Timmy Tillman. Tina, if you're here, I'm still asking you to unmute, but Timmy Tillman, you wrote in the chat, let me see, where is your comment? Good to listen to this group of contributors, important insights for teaching leadership, trust in your people, be collaborative. Timmy Tillman, could you introduce yourself as a contributor to the dialogue? And and would love to hear what are these insights that you're gaining from listening and why are they important to you?
I'm Timmy Tillman. I'm a member of the VIP core team, the Visualization and Participatory Programs we are working worldwide and training facilitators, and it's always learning by doing. So I never have been part of a leadership training, but because I think that all leadership training has to be learning by doing. So when we work with people, we always show the recognition, the respect to the people, and to give them the chance to develop their skills, their possibilities, to voice their concerns and work together and not being in conflicts with others. So and so we are based on in this learning by doing to foster the group dynamics, because it's not you who can teach, it's the group which evolves and develops a new vision, a new position. So we always think that during several days of training that people get stronger as a group and build a community, and they apply this to their future work. So this is what I can contribute. Thank you for the ideas from mainly ladies.
All right, thank you, Timmy. I want to go to this comment that's coming in via Facebook from Hajara Musa Suleiman, who says, so he's responding to Esther, I believe, and says, yes, it is good to, I'm guessing, rub minds, not to impose on our children what Esther said. Will be good for us to introduce in our schools to bring the leaders of tomorrow, allowing them to fly. Yes. And so I want to go back to Esther. Your latest endeavor is called Tract, I believe. Can you tell us what is it? And then we're going to explore this endeavor through this this lens of learning and leadership, and go back to questions around your life and your vision for leadership.
Well, thank you again. I'll tell you a little bit about Tract. So it's called TRACT, tract.app. And the goal of this app, or it's actually an online site, is to allow kids who are between the ages of 15 and 20, or actually we expanded to 22, to create leadership like learning paths. Anything they think kids younger might want to learn. And we help them be teachers and leaders and change makers. And the learning paths they create are for kids 8 to 14. And they can create it about anything they want. And we have several people on the staff that help them develop their videos, help them create whatever they want to say, basically help them be effective. And, kids, we need to respect their ideas, give them an opportunity to develop leadership skills. And this is what we're doing with Tract. Those teenagers are developing leadership skills. The kids younger are seeing that, kids a little bit older are becoming leaders. I too can do that when I get a little bit older. And so we're giving this, it's free to all classroom teachers worldwide. Right now it's only in English, but we're hoping next year to be in multiple languages and to get these kid leaders, change makers from countries all over the world, to give their students or students everywhere to work together as a community, collaborative. I mean, just what Catherine was saying, we want these kids to grow up with a mindset that says we all need to work together. So that's what Tract is. And I would love to invite you and invite people in your country or your community or whatever to just go online. If they want to go online, I sent it to Reda, a list of all the websites. But one of them, if they want to be creators, is just create.tract.app. And that allows kids to be change makers and leaders. If they want to be users, they just go. Actually, the best thing would be to have their teachers go to teach.track.app, and then we upload all the kids in their class, and we help them. And by the way, for teachers who want to always know what the kids are doing, which, by the way, I don't think is the greatest idea, but teachers seem to want to do this, so we accommodate. They get to see what the students are working on and the projects, and everything is project-based, collaborative. So at the end of every one of these learning paths, they have a hands-on project that they do, and then they share it with other kids and other people. So that's just a small information about Tract.
Yep.
I'd love to be able to give you more information if you're interested. And Reda has all my contact information.
Absolutely, and we'd love to share both, your links and resources along with those of other key contributors. What we'd like to focus on here is, what does leadership mean in an endeavor like this one? Ostensibly it's a startup, but it's more than that. It's about you, but I imagine there are many other people involved. And maybe a sort of a question before that, how does the work you're doing now, and specifically the leadership components of it, what does leadership mean in this? What are you leading? What is it that enables you to lead? Everything from creating this, to fundraising, to hiring and firing, to waking up every day wanting to make a difference through this work. How has a life dedicated to teaching and learning shaped your vision of leadership? You've told us already quite a bit. I wanted to put it this way: are all teachers leaders?
No, not all teachers are not leaders, unfortunately. And that's because teachers are basically implementing a curriculum developed by someone else. And so they're following instructions. I'm trying to develop leadership skills. And the CEO of Tract is my former student. The first 15 people in the company were my former students. They all understand what I was doing in the class, so they were always very able to bring that to Tract. And then all the other people that have joined, we have about 40 people now, they all understand it. And what we're trying to do is to empower kids. Your idea, might be better than you think it is. Most kids don't believe in themselves. What can we do to help kids believe in themselves? Help them do things that they think are important for the world? Why are we all just following the same routine? I'm developing leaders here. And also, I'm helping teachers. So teachers around the world, the number one thing all teachers around the world want to have more of is time. No time. There's so much to do, so many kids, so much to teach, and they have no time. So if they give kids an opportunity to work on Tract just for 20% of the time, and they can decide that 20% themselves, they will then have more time to devote to doing things that are going to make their teaching more effective. And so that's my goal, is to help teachers be more effective. Also help kids be more creative and believe in themselves, and then help these older teens be change makers. If there's something in your community that should be done, most kids they're just like, oh, no one's going to listen to me. I was like, yeah, they might listen to you. Why don't you see what you can present and some ideas that you can bring that are going to make the world a better place. By the way, we have prizes, or I guess XP, that the kids earn by doing these learning paths, and they're all tied to the UN Sustainable Goals. And that was not my idea, by the way. It was the idea of the kids. They wanted to do this. They came up with this idea, which I thought was amazing. And so, little kids are more worried about the world today than you give them credit for. And so that's what I'm trying to do with younger kids, older kids, and helping teachers at the same time.
Thank you, Esther. I owe an apology to our key contributor, Renee Rogers. I'm very sorry. I just spotted you in the room and therefore haven't been able to turn to you yet. I would like to do so now with my deepest apologies. Renee, you you have been already involved in the dialogue. You've said that you're focused on understanding coaching as a learning process relevant for developing consciousness to face the current existential threats to human survival and evolution. And we just heard Esther talk about how concerned kids are with the fate of the world. Listening to this conversation, what are your thoughts? What are you hearing about the nature, the direction, the meaning of leadership in this crazy world that we live in?
I'm really enjoying Esther's description of starting so young, and really our hope is in a new way of looking at educating children, and her efforts are really inspiring. I think a lot about leadership because that's what I do now as a leadership coach. I was a leader about 20 years, 25 years, and then I have turned to coaching. And my own personal view from my experience and from working with leaders is that we can't underestimate how important the interpersonal and intrapersonal journey is in becoming in having the kind of consciousness to really be an effective leader. And, are leaders born or are they made? That's a kind of question I think we've been looking at. Certainly circumstances create the conditions that call forth leadership. But are we ready? Are we ready in terms of a consciousness that is inclusive enough to really deal with the fact that the world is very, very diverse? And if we're going to collaborate, we have to really be not only tolerant, but generous about all the ways that everybody can contribute to the problems that we face. So, I feel like sometimes it's as simple as leaders really being called to make situations safe. And that's a lot harder to do than it sounds, because it means that they have themselves to be vulnerable and open and really generous in assumptions about other people, about what's going on. But as we evolve as leaders, then we're able to have a consciousness to really be with all this diversity, all this experience. We could go off on all this trauma, all the stream of sorrow that Krishnamurti refers to, the river of sorrow, that we can hold all that and be present with it so that people can really show up and make contributions and be who they really are. So I focus a lot on the personal journey, the individual learning, and as leaders demonstrate that in themselves, that in itself is a leadership act.
Thank you so much, Renee Rogers. I want to now turn back to Emanuele Capobianco, who's the head of health at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, in case you haven't heard him speak yet. And you said you were interested in discussing COVID-19 response, which, as you explained, has been keeping you busy, and specifically the successes, failures, and what needs to change in the future. And you share this vision of what's actually, I believe, you're experiencing to some degree every day, of this very new way of working that is decentralized, that is much less command and control and much more distributed. And so I think we need to ask at this stage, well, who is going to lead this change in the future, the change that you see as needed? Why and how would this change happen? That's kind of an open-ended question for you, Emanuele. If you'd like to share your thoughts on that as we explore the leadership question around the need for change.
I would go back to Esther's and looking at the future generations are the ones that are going to bring the change that we need, because of that understanding of the challenges that we have ahead, much deeper, much more personal, and probably coming from early on. The systems we inhabit is a system that has been created, and I'm looking at the multilateral system, which is I am extremely supportive of, 70 plus years ago, and has been fairly rigid in its structures. While and I'm thinking about more the development and humanitarian side, and I think the digitalization that is coming, the transformation that is coming with that, and that is being led by younger generation, this localization that is COVID has demonstrated by necessity, will move by default. And I do hope that the changes will really come from within the countries, within those communities, those young people that are there, in a form of leadership that will be much more diffuse, connected than it is right now. Of course, it needs to have a lot of transfer of knowledge, of tools that I hope it will be coming, moving forward. But if I take, and since we have a lot of people in the immunization world listening to us, that's where I feel that the leadership that the US has demonstrated lately vis-a-vis the vaccines and the lifting of patents, the technology transfer and the technology of know-how, points to that direction. That is very important to bring manufacturing capacity into countries for vaccines that may be coming late for this specific pandemic, because it will take many years. But the fact that the Biden administration has moved in that direction has shocked the system. I think it will potentially generate a change that will be much more systemic, long-lasting, and helping for future epidemic and pandemic. And that's one example around vaccine, but it's really flipping the paradigms. And I think that is what we need to see moving more towards the rest of the world, making sure that the leadership, the capacity that is in country has the opportunity to emerge, to flourish, also because we will then benefit also in the richer worlds from that experience, from that leadership that will be there and is already there, making a lot of teaching for all of us, certainly in the humanitarian world.
Thank you so much, Emanuele Copabianco. I am going to now turn to Karen Watkins, and I've asked Karen if she could share some of her reflections on the discussion so far. And then I'm going to be a lot less command and control for the remaining time. We have about 27 minutes and far more distributed, because I'm really going to open up now the space to the key contributors for you to really share as we move into the last part of this month's dialogue. What are your thoughts, recaps? I know there's some specific things that I'd like Kath to share around the work that she's doing around remote partnering. There's a number of other issues that key contributors highlighted. So both sort of recap, synthesis, insights, takeaways that you gain. But first, Karen.
Thank you, Reda. What an interesting conversation. I'm always struck by the role of context and how the different contexts that people are in, whether it's in schools for Esther or certainly the context that Emanuele is in, help us gain these insights. So our context Timmy talked about a different context as well. So as you think about each of these contexts and how leadership emerges in it, what are the threads that connect? And I think, this listening to the voice of those who must be led, right? Those of us who lead and those of us who are led, that indigenous knowledge, the work at the local level, seems such a powerful thread in what each person is talking about. And and of course the collaboration that I remember Renee Rogers said one time that it wasn't so much that people were in teams, it was that they felt they were on the same team. Are we really collaborating at a higher level? And I think leaders can become good at producing that higher level. So I've really, I think there've been a number of pieces like that continue to connect for me in what I think great leadership is. And I was thrilled, Timmy, at your comment that much of this was coming from the voice of women. So, and I think that's true. There is we are listening to voices that we have perhaps not listened to in the past, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Reda.
Thank you very much indeed. So Karen, I see a very interesting comment from Barbara Moser-Mercer. So Barbara, would love to hear from you. And then really, even if that means there's a pause as different key contributors figure out who's going to speak next, that will be fine for the remainder of the time. Barbara, would you like to share your thoughts at this stage?
Yeah, just briefly, extremely impressed with all that I've heard. Really thought-provoking. That'll keep me going on the long flight tomorrow. I'm sure I'll be thinking about, okay, how can I apply this? I do, going back to what Emanuele said, I do hope that the shift in power is accompanied by a shift in funding, and therefore also by a shift really over to those who have proven beyond any doubt that they can keep the world going. Because, those of us who weren't able to go places anymore haven't been able to do it, and that may have been a good thing. But, let's really hope that that's going to happen. It really needs to go beyond tokenist approaches. We've seen a lot of tokenism lately. And whether that's going to be followed up on remains to be seen. I do see a lot of backlash already. Very interesting and disconcerting ways of keeping the hand on the power, not letting those traditional power structures go away. You really have to be very vigilant. And I think if all of us can be very vigilant and call out when we see those hidden kind of initiatives, I think that would be an act of solidarity and collaboration from all of us who've been thinking a great deal about leadership and what it really means. So that would be my summary. But a huge thank you to everyone. It's been very, 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 very thought-provoking.
Thank you, Barbara. I see a really interesting comment from Brian. Do you want to share your comment for listeners and tell us more?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, one of the things which is I've really noticed is a common thread through much of what people have been talking about is this issue of listening to people who are at the coal face, to use a very sort of non-sustainable term. People who are at the sort of the sharp end of what is happening, because they're the people who understand what is really happening, what is the variety being presented by the workplace, by what they're having to do. There's a very important principle in systems thinking, the law of requisite variety, which is that a system can only manage what it's dealing with if it's able to regulate the variety that it's dealing with. And the problem for leaders is if they're disconnected from what is actually happening at the sharp end of the workplace, is that they don't understand what the variety is. They don't understand that people are developing their own ways of working, they're developing their own ideas, they're learning their own way of doing things. And that kind of feeds into the idea of complexity and complex adaptive systems. in that if you have a leader who is dominating and doesn't listen to his or her team, then he or she is not able to actually listen to the variety that the people are dealing with. And there's this concept in complex adaptive systems, the edge of chaos, which is where you can find a sweet spot between being coherent in what you do, which is the message coming from a leader, but also being flexible in what you do and listening to the messages which are coming from the members of the team, who are really the best people to know how to deal with the complexity of the situation they're dealing with. So, from a kind of like a systems thinking theoretical perspective, all of this, issue about, leaders being prepared to listen and be vulnerable. I mean, that was a really interesting term. I'm, sort of in my personal life at the moment, my stepdaughter is going through a difficult time where she is having to learn to be vulnerable about things. And I think she's getting a lot of strength from being vulnerable. And I think that's one of the things, that leaders need to recognize, that you don't have to be strong, capable, knowing everything all the time, but actually being vulnerable is a really important tool for a leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. All right, we have, in the time remaining, it's really, I would love to hear from both key contributors and contributors in the room. If you're a contributor, you can raise your hand or leave a message in the chat, and then we can open up your microphone. I want to read out Tina Irogama's comments. I am inspired by how Esther managed as a leader at a tender age of 10 years old. Such leaders are usually very kind and passionate to make positive changes. Thank you, Tina. I think we're not going to be able to hear from you. From the key contributors, who would like to share their reflections on the dialogue tonight, this afternoon, or this morning for some of you? Nancy, I see your microphone is open.
Thank you. I just have an example that Esther reminded me of in her app that she created. This one is a bit more not so high sophisticated, but work that I was doing in Nigeria with mother-child health. And the group that I was working with had been for a long time bringing people together from different regions of the country to learn from people who'd done something really well. And so very often it was putting someone in front of the group who explained what they had done, and others listened. And I looked at that for quite a while, and I began to think of that as the beauty contest situation, because I think it turns out that people don't really learn very well from having someone explain what they did. They learn when they can sit with that person and talk with the person, and especially when they can explain their own situation to that person and say, okay, but you worked in a hospital that has 6 physicians. I work in a hospital that has 1. How could I possibly do that in my situation? So what we changed to, which turned out to work wonderfully, was that we asked people at every table to talk both about their successes and their failures, so that people could question each other. And it turned out that many of the failures were as important to others as were the successes, because then they knew what not to do because it hadn't worked somewhere else. So that idea that the learning really needs to come through a conversation with others, not through a presentation and not through something they've written up, but through really listening, thinking with them, even questioning them to say, okay, help me understand how I could do that in this situation, turned out to be incredibly valuable.
Thank you. That's Nancy Dixon. And in fact, your work, as I understand it, is focused on increasing collaboration and knowledge sharing in work. And you say our most effective knowledge sharing tool is conversation. I hope in a way this dialogue is an ode to your conviction. I do want to turn to Kath. Kath asked ahead of the dialogue, one of the questions she was hoping we could get to would be, how can we become more effective at managing our teams and partnerships online. And so I know some of her current work involves answering this question, but it also begs the leadership question of that, which is, what has been your leadership journey, Kath, that led you to embrace this question? So I know you had a comment and wanted to respond first, but I want to throw that question at you as well, so you can tell us about this work and also tell you, like, what's been that journey that led you to consider that particular question about managing teams and partnerships online as particularly important to you and your work.
Thanks, Reda. Yeah, I think, we're working more and more remotely, and this advantages some people and disadvantages others. So just like when we were working face-to-face, had, power issues were going on in the face-to-face environment, they're equally happening in the online environment, but differently. And I think if we really want to make difference as a leader, we have to really bring intention to what is it that we're trying to do. What is it that we're aiming to do? We have to know what we're trying to do, because if we don't, then we end up falling into the default positions that we always were of the old power balances. I developed it was like the 4 I's of remote partnering. Be happy to share them quickly if you want to hear them. So the first one I just mentioned was intention. The second one was inclusion, ensuring individuals' needs are addressed, making the unheard voices heard, engaging hearts and minds. Innovation, bringing humanity to the technology, not being led by the technology, but really bringing multiple modalities, but multiple voices and multiple ideas. And then the last I was imagination. And I think just even the richness of today, I'm feeling could be even richer if we had more voices from local communities, from, we've heard from some amazing people today, Hajara, Steve, Sohini, and I'd love to see more contributors coming up, stepping up from those communities, just very conscious of how many of us are white women speaking today, when there's richness out there that I know is, bringing wisdom to our table that I want to hear. So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you, Kath. All right, thank you very much indeed. All right, let's hear. Who shall we hear from next? Please go ahead and unmute yourself and share your comments and thoughts and reflections about this dialogue. Would love to hear from you. Let's see, let's have a look online as our key contributors compose their thoughts. And we're not in a hurry. There's no pressure or stress. We want this to be a different kind of space. There's no for reflection, a kind of safe haven. All right, and Esther has been sharing information about Tract. Laura, you wrote, the importance of engagement keeps striking me as a theme across today's conversation. Would you like to say more about that?
Sure. I think one of the authors whose work on engagement I follow is Brad Shuck. And, I think engagement is a state where people feel seen, heard, and that they belong to the organization. And I think leadership, in a large part, is ensuring that things don't obstruct people feeling that engagement, which I think speaks to some of the issues of diversity and inclusion that we've talked about. And I think, to me, leadership is really about the quality of relationships that you cultivate with the people in your organization or your community. And I think right now, especially as we look toward possibly a post-pandemic time, is, how will leaders be in relationship post-pandemic? And I've been thinking a lot about gathering, if we gather, when we gather, why we gather, and how, and to really be mindful about those virtual and in-person spaces that we create to help people feel engaged and able to step up and be leaders even when they didn't see themselves in that way. So I think for me, engaged relationships is what I'm thinking about after listening today. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Laura Bierema. And just as a reminder for those who joined midway, you're a former HR executive in the auto industry who transferred to higher ed to work in programs dedicated to promoting learning and development in the workplace. Rogers Kenny, yes, Rogers has... yeah, I'm trying to unmute you, Rogers. Would love to hear from you as well. Oh, Rogers, was that not intentional? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Reda. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. In here in Nigeria, it's evening. And I really want to appreciate the team. For me, it's been really inspiring talking about leadership and learning, especially in the health sector and immunization and vaccine where I really work, is all what the contributors or what the experts have said have really been inspiring and true in essence, because the world is becoming so dynamic and the pandemic has truly thrown up a whole lot of issues that experts are not really experts per se, but they are only practitioners. For me, what I've really learned from this whole discourse and practically in the field of immunization is that no one is an expert anymore, because what you're an expert in today, the subject matter you think you know most, something will just turn up and you see that those in the field, the least people in the field knows it better than you are. A typical example is the immunization and COVID-19 activities we've seen today. Our expert and managers at the offices do not really know the issue like those in the communities and rural areas that are going out to engage in people, talking to people to get vaccines. So they are, for me, the least people are now the experts, unlike the top-bottom approach that we've really seen. And learning more about the HCD, that's the human-centered design approach, that have now become so common, has truly changed the dynamic of leadership. So for me, the best leaders are those who are open-minded to learn from the least people. So leaders are really those who are influencing change. I really like what some of the authors and some of the big experts here have really talked about, taking into cognizance and consideration, people demonstrating kindness, making people feel good. I think is one area in the context where I work, leaders don't really think about how do fellow practitioners feel when certain actions are taken or certain decisions are taken. Is really one thing I pick from this whole discourse, showing kindness in the course of leadership so that people feel good at the end of the activities, because how they feel is what will really remain with them. And collaboration is now key. We can't take that away. With technology, we've now seen that collaboration, in short, is a hallmark of leadership. Whichever leader that doesn't believe in collaboration, I think will go obsolete. So for me, I don't believe in this phenomenon of experts anymore. We are only but practitioners, because the world is becoming so dynamic. What you're an expert today may just change and you see yourself as knowing nothing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Rogers Kani. Good to hear your voice. There is a question of how do we change that paradigm? How do we lead the change to a world where everyone has a voice? And I think it's very much part and parcel of how we see our role at the Geneva Learning Foundation, with this thinking, the starting point of education as a philosophy for change in the world that we live in, and also call perhaps, alongside that, to think about, let's not be naive. Right now, the voice, the power, the funding are concentrated in the hands of the few. And what is the process that we shall go through to change that? How do we think through that transition or that transformation that many are calling for? Well, that's just one thought I had as I listening to the different contributions and voices. Are there any further final thoughts from key contributors or other contributors in the room before we close this third dialogue for learning, leadership, and impact? Yes, Karen.
I would just like to say thank you to all of the contributors that have joined us this day. I think that the combination of thoughts, as others have said, will leave us all thinking and pondering, but richer for having heard from each person.
Wonderful. All right, I believe we can do more than thank. We can actually offer a genuine, hearty, authentic round of applause, if you will. I'm actually also going to ask everyone to unmute in an artificially silent room. Please do. And if you'd like to, for those of you who are in our Zoom studio, if you'd like to turn on the your webcam so we can actually see each other. We've made a deliberate choice to make this audio only, but for the pleasure of seeing each other. And again, thanking you for having joined this. After such intense reflection, I'm not sure if this sort of stadium-style applause is appropriate, but you know what? I don't care. I just feel there needs to be something emotional and some noise after such hearty discussion. Thank you to all the key contributors, to all of you. Over 450 people had registered for this. Grateful especially to our immunization community and to the other learning communities at the Geneva Learning Foundation that helped make this dialogue a success. Thank you once again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.